Ray Starling's our moderator. He is the General Counsel, North Carolina Chamber of Commerce. He currently serves as General Counsel of North Carolina Chamber and President of the Chamber's Legal Institute. He's served in several policy development roles over the years, principally focused on agriculture and rural policy. He's been General Counsel to the North Carolina Commissioner of Agriculture, General Counsel and Ag Advisor to Senator Tom Tillis, eventually becoming Senator Chief of Staff. 2017, he was tapped to staff the National Economic Council at the White House as Special Assistant to the President for Agriculture. Later, he became Chief of Staff of the USDA. Ray's obtained a bachelor's in agricultural education, magna cum laude from NC State, received his law degree with honors from the University of North Carolina Law School, senior lecturer fellow at the Regent Law School. Be teaching agricultural law at University of North Carolina School of Law within the next academic year. So I'm going to introduce Bill also. So Bill's the director, North Carolina Food Innovation Lab. He's led the lab since it was a mere seedling, 2018. He's one of the most experienced food scientists in the country, has held several research, operation, leadership, management positions for companies such as Cargill, Land O'Lakes, Terry Ingredients. Has a Bachelor of Science degree in food science from Purdue, graduate degrees from Virginia Tech, State University in food science. He's also an IFT fellow of the American Dairy Science Association, distinguished agricultural alumnus, both Virginia Tech and Purdue. Also serves as industry advisory committees for agriculture engineering at Penn State, food science, Virginia Tech, and Agricultural Innovation Forum, Florida, University of Illinois Integrated Bioprocessing Research Laboratory. Bill, sounds like you know what you're talking about. Why don't you share with us?
Well, sure. I'll share a little bit with what I do know. Good morning. Thank you, everyone. I thought I would talk a little bit today about the North Carolina Food Innovation Lab, but I'll also talk a little bit about the food processing industry and our usage of energy in general. We're kind of at an interesting time in the food processing area. The pandemic really pushed some things forward for all of us, and I'll talk briefly about a few things there. The North Carolina Food Innovation Lab is a collaborative project between the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, and North Carolina State University, and the North Carolina Research Campus. NC State is the managing director or the managing partner of this relationship, so I'm an employee of North Carolina State. We started about 2 years ago when it started about 7 years ago when then Governor McCrory and the General Assembly recognized the fact that we grow about 85 to 90 different crops in the state of North Carolina, and 85% of that was leaving the state for further processing. And that entrepreneurs didn't really have a place that they could go start sharing ideas and look at product development and scale up. Thus was born the North Carolina Food Innovation Lab through an act of the General Assembly. A couple other facts about North Carolina: we have a livestock population of over 40 million. And then we rank second right now in the nation in food processing, employing over 70,000 of our citizens here in the state. Several initiatives going on in the state to make this a very powerful strategic triad, especially in relation to plant-based foods, which, if you've been following plant-based foods during the pandemic, we grew from about an annual growth rate of 22% per year, upwards of 45% at the height of the pandemic. We've drifted back down now, but we're still enjoying about a 25 to 26% compounded growth on year. The Plant Science Initiative on campus, about $166 million project. We'll study plant sciences literally from the genetics to the plate. And then we also work very closely with our colleagues over in the Plants for Human Health Institute, who typically do research on looking at the nutritional value of various components of foods, especially plant-based foods, and how they react in the body from both a nutrition as well as a physiological perspective. After that's all said and done, then they leave it up to us in the innovation lab to go figure out ways to not screw it up when we process it and keep the nutritional value of those products. Now, the food manufacturing industry is a huge consumer of energy. Many of you probably already know that. We utilize something like 1.6 quadrillion BTUs per year to process food. For those of you that weren't familiar with what a quadrillion is, it's a 1 followed by 15 zeros. So you can see that's quite a bit of BTUs. We're the third largest industry user as an industry of energy. and about 16% of the total energy consumption in the country is actually going into food processing. Splits out about 58% of its electricity, 32% natural gas, and 10% diesel and fuel oil, mostly in our backup generators or in remote areas where we have some problems getting natural gas. If you were to look at the one industry category that is probably the largest user of all the food categories, it would probably be the edible fats and oils refineries, which are just short of really being similar to a petroleum refinery when you look at the technology that's there. Looking at one of my favorite plant-based foods here, where do we use energy in our food plants? Heating and drying, of course, cooking, refrigeration, boilers. We utilize a huge amount of steam in the food industry, especially for thermal processing, machine drives, product handling equipment, lighting, and of course, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning are all using quite a bit of energy. I said, the pandemic changed some things in our food plants, and it directly impacts when we have an energy conversation. We are seeing now that more robotics will be coming into play as we try to exercise more social distancing and protect our employees. We'll in general have quite a bit more automation throughout our manufacturing processes. All of this is probably going to be dependent, of course, on large amounts of electricity. And then there'll be more and improved direct-to-consumer capabilities from food manufacturers, which indirectly affects our energy, but certainly it affects our ability to access information into the cloud. And so as our rural communities continue to strive to get more dependence or independence from a computing power perspective, it becomes a big play even from an energy perspective. A few other things, a lot of new processes for managing future disruptions and realignments of our supply chains will all be important to the industry post-pandemic. A little bit about the North Carolina Food Innovation Lab. As I said earlier, we are a plant-based focused facility. We operate under good manufacturing practices and follow the Food Safety Manufacturing Act. We can start with entrepreneurs or with established companies doing ideation around new ideas for products. We utilize a lot of different techniques that are taught at the likes of Harvard and Stanford business schools. Our product development lab, about 2,500 square feet, staffed with industry experienced food scientists, as well as interns from Johnson & Wales University on the culinary side, so that we can take a recipe from an entrepreneur and make it a formula that can be run in production. From there, we go into pilot plant production, where we have a 10,000 square foot facility that's really can cover everything in the plant world, from plants to grains to seeds to rootlets, and of course produce like fruits and vegetables. We can bring it in, we can wash it, we can cut it, we can puree it, we can make juice, we can can it, we can do extraction. We have extraction capability, extract bioactives, natural colors, natural flavors, and then we have extrusion capability and thermal processing throughout our facility, as well as drying capability. We're reliant on our facility mostly on steam and electrical, and of course water. So those are some of the pieces of equipment we have that could potentially be equipped with sensors in the future to better understand the impact of a process on energy consumption and, of course, even energy waste. We also do a fair amount of consulting and training services for the food industry. We've been brought in on a number of situations where companies have asked us to help them get ready to build new facilities and thinking about it from a food safety and energy efficiency perspective. We have a professional photographer on staff, so if people want to launch products with videos or with new photos, we can help in that area. And then, of course, we have sensory services that we work with on the Raleigh campus. In North Carolina, the food industry is very active right now, looking and recruiting companies into our state. This is data from the Economic Development Partnership in North Carolina. My friend Mary Lisa Pegg supplied this graphic to me just last week. If we look at all of the projects across all the different sectors going on in North Carolina right now, we got about 33 active projects in the food, beverage, and agricultural area, and you can see that far exceeds all other categories other than other, which can be a little bit of everything. So food industry is actively looking to move to North Carolina. If you ask the question where they're coming from, it shouldn't be any surprise. We're seeing companies from California, we're seeing companies from New Jersey, New York, and then of course a good handful of North Carolina companies looking to expand also. We're situated in North Carolina to handle the food industry, to help the food industry grow. The Food Innovation Lab, Plants for Human Health Institute down here in Kannapolis, on the North Carolina Research Campus, of course, NC State up in Raleigh, the North Carolina Biotechnology Center in the Triangle, and then we have North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, all academic halls of expertise to help people grow there. And then for the entrepreneur that doesn't want to build their own facility yet, there is the Blue Ridge Food Ventures as well as the Piedmont Food and Ag Processing Centers where they can go produce their own foods before they brick and mortar or before they go looking for a co-manufacturer. So that's a quick overview on what we do. And we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn. If you're interested in talking to us, my contact information is right there. So thank you for your time.
You bet, Bill. Thank you. Let me jump in. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right, that's good. I'm not sure what happened. So thank you, David, for pinch hitting. And Bill, I had a couple of more nice things I was going to say about you. One of which was Bill did not spend his entire career in the ivory tower. He is very much a food manufacturing and processing guru. I was also going to mention your years at Purdue, and we are slowly working that out of you, I think, here at NC State. So glad to have you in North Carolina, and it's exciting what all you all are doing. You mentioned the role energy plays in this conversation of growing the food processing network. The next three speakers, Paul Sproul, Sean Hunt, and Matt Hangman, are going to talk about that a little bit more and even give us an example. I see Sean on the screen there, and I think about the food manufacturing haven that he has down in the part of the state where he is. Let me begin first by introducing Paul. Paul is the general manager and the CEO of Tideland EMC out in Pantego. That's just northeast of the metropolis of Belhaven, for those following along. Paul has a fascinating background because he did not grow up, if you will, in the energy sector. He didn't grow up in the co-op system. He actually has background as a county manager for Eastern North Carolina counties. Also mentioned he's a demon deacon at heart, although he did an MPA over at UNC Chapel Hill. And I'm not going to ask about any conflicts there, but we'll let him sort that out with himself. Sean, the interim president and CEO of the Lumbee River EMC, prior to coming into that role, he in fact worked on economic development efforts throughout that service area down there. I have to mention, Sean, that you're a true Aggie. I saw in your background where you had spent a decade at Ag First down at the Farm Credit there. I bet there's a Farmer Strong hat or two laying around your house somewhere. Sean got his MPA at UNC Pembroke, which is where he also picked up his undergraduate degree. So, Sean, look forward to hearing your comments in a second. And finally, we're excited to have Matt Tangman join us. At least I hope Matt's joined us. I don't quite see him yet. But Matt has been in the egg business, and not just any egg business, but the good egg business, to be clear, for about 21 years. That's how long he's worked with Rose Acre Farms. Like Dr. Aimutis, he was originally trained at Purdue, but we're not going to hold that against either of them. You'll find that Matt is truly a good egg, and we're glad he's on the panel. Forgive the puns, but I think we have an excellent panel coming up. I'm just getting started. I'm starting to come out of my here. Paul, we're going to start with you, I believe, and let you kick us off for this second part of the panel discussion. Be my guest.
Yes. Thank you, sir. We appreciate that. I'm just going to open with a few words. There'll be review to some degree from Ryan's presentation earlier this morning. This is in regard to North Carolina's electric cooperatives in Raleigh, which operate both as a G&T and a distribution operator. And they do this on behalf of our 26 distribution cooperatives spread from east to west. I think this next slide will give us a good visual. There we go. And North Carolina's electric cooperatives and their expertise as our distribution operator, has given us a platform for growing a number of distributed energy resource solutions across the North Carolina map. One project we're going to highlight a little bit later with Mr. Tangman's help, and that's the Rose Acre Farms project. This first slide maybe is helpful in understanding our organizational structure. You're going to notice the North Carolina Electric Cooperative statewide logo there in Wake County. That represents our corporate headquarters. Then you're also going to notice the geographic coverage of the 26 distribution electric cooperatives across the state. Cape Hatteras out there at number 4 is among the smallest at 7,770 connected and metered services. And then Energy United at number 8 there in Iredell County is the largest of our 26 with 131,000 connected. Ryan did a good job at about 9:25 today talking about the separate and distinct identities of each of our entities as not-for-profit corporations. Each of our organizations is owned by the member consumers that we serve within our local communities. So our 26 boards of directors are elected each year to a specified term of service. Ryan mentioned earlier that we're doing this in 93 of North Carolina's 100 counties. We're about 45% of the land mass, 24% of the state's population. Finally, we'll encourage you to take note of the red target gun sites featured on Untitled and EMC at number 23 and Lumbee River at number 14 on this map. And as a team of 3, Sean Hunt and Matt Tangman and I are going to offer you guys a few real-life examples of our interest as electric cooperatives in developing solutions for agricultural facilities that we serve. We're going to start with Sean, and then we'll quickly move through our opening comments and save a little ammunition for Mr. Starling in a question and answer session a little later. So I want to say on Sean's behalf that in the world of NC Electric Co-op, Sean's Lumbee River EMC organization is really, really significant in the context of load served and member consumers served, and more importantly for today's discussion, his agricultural impact. So Sean, I'll let you tell us what's been going on in the southern part of the state.
Thanks a lot, Paul. And to address Ray, yes, there are quite a few Farmer Strong and BioStar logoed items still around the house. To follow up, yeah, thanks, Paul. Lumbee River, we serve 5 county territories, southeastern North Carolina. Really, this is a food-rich or food processing-rich area of the state. Bill mentioned there was about 40 million animals or livestock animals across the state. If our calculations and numbers are right, at full capacity with all of the processing livestock barns, we're somewhere around about 6 million animals that we serve across that territory. So all those 6 million animals feed into quite a few of our large processing facilities. Sanderson Farms processing a little bit better than 1.5 million birds a week. Butterball doing secondary processing, Prestige handling somewhere in the range of about 300,000 turkeys a week. Campbell Soup, we do a number of secondary processing facilities where we don't serve the main facility, but we serve secondary processing, like Campbell Soup, which is a fairly large food processor in this area. Mount Air Farms, which is another large processor in this area. But the ones we're seeing on the screen are all food processors. And we have one of the distinctions in the state. North Carolina's #1 producer of sweet potatoes in the state, but we have very few processors of sweet potatoes in the state. So Trinity Frozen Foods is one of those that we've been lucky enough to have in our area. Over the last few months, particularly before COVID struck, we were in talks with a number of these different companies that were trying to meet goals that they had set forth, either to reduce carbon emissions from their processing or the entire energy cycle associated with bringing their product to market, looking for better, more efficient ways to handle processing. COVID kind of put a damper on a lot of those. There were a lot of parts in the air But one of the things that we as cooperatives, Paul mentioned, we collectively work together. Each of the 26 are unique and individual, but we collectively work together. NCEMC, particularly Diane Heiss, and her group who manages innovation and business development there at NCEMC, they have been a wonderful resource for us in researching these new technologies and allowing us to bring it to market. Because honestly, the thing that we found is many of these manufacturers or processors simply don't know about this technology, or they're, it's so new, they're not aware of it. So we've been able to bring that to them.
You need the next slide, Sean. Here you go.
Yeah. So couple of these, couple of the items that we've been talking about with a number of these manufacturers. One, of course, anytime you've got food processing, you've got storage. We're lucky enough, we serve a number of distribution facilities and cold storages. And typically when you've got food processing and cold storages, you've got refrigerated trailers. Right now, the technology is really new, but we're in talks with a number of companies about trying out these, what we call e-trues, which are electric refrigeration trailers, which eliminate the idling diesel trailers around the facility. Those have been really well received. The technology is just starting to emerge. Again, COVID kind of put a damper on that. We were hoping to have quite a few of those deployed by 2021, summer 2021. So availability of resources have kind of slowed that down. But even within some of our other ones, COVID's kind of highlighted some bright points with sanitation. UV light sanitation is something that a lot of our C&I customers in the food processing area have come to us and started asking questions about how they could implement that, what kind of load it would create. And we've been happy to assist them there on that as well. So, and kind of to circle back, one of the things, again, coming from an economic development background, the energy portion of most C&I customers' expenses is only 3 to 5%. So it's a very small portion. But where the value of some of these electrification processes actually starts to be beneficial is that they can increase production. With one of the examples that we've run for a local manufacturer, it could increase, should they go fully electric with that, it could increase their efficiency as much as 25% is the numbers that we've come up with. That's more precise temperature control, reduced wastewater, and just a number of different processes that we've been able to identify. Again, the beneficial electrification and sustainable technology, this is kind of an emerging sector that we are trying to concentrate on. And luckily, having so many food processors in the area, it's been one of those things that's been really well received on our end, and starting to take hold in the area. I mentioned earlier in the presentation this e-trues. On your screen, you'll see examples of this technology. And one of the real challenges with this is a lot of our transportation, the companies themselves don't own the fleet. So that's been one of the real drawbacks or hindrance from more widespread adoption of these technologies. The technology is pretty well proven at this point. But because most of the companies looking into this technology don't actually own the fleet of refrigeration trailers, the adoption has been slow. We're hoping to try to get some pilots together with some of these companies that we're working with to, as they say, monkey see, monkey do, try to get more people involved, more companies looking into these technologies. And the last part of that is, of course, the electrification of other road vehicles. We've been fortunate, particularly here in North Carolina, with some of the Volkswagen money, to be able to build out a pretty substantial network for EV drivers. And we see that the electrification of large vehicles will be one of those drivers moving forward, that will help kind of firm up some of the base load that we're seeing erode away due to energy efficiency and energy conservation technologies.
Thank you, sir. I don't want to interrupt Mr. Starling. He might have more puns or acronyms that he needs to insert at this point.
You drive on, Paul. Go ahead and let's hear from you and Matt.
Okay, thanks. I'll steal one of yours. I'll introduce the good egg, Mr.
right.
Matt Tangman, in a second. Very quickly, I wanted to give the audience an overview of Rose Acre and its proposed microgrid project as one of several projects underway in North Carolina's electric cooperatives as they act as our distribution operator. I think this next slide is going to touch on the various projects, there we go, which incorporate microgrid controllers and battery storage that we own at several project locations around the state, and where other components of the microgrid at these locations are often owned by our hosts. So it's an interesting partnership at different sites, different ownership for different assets. Examples of what we're seeing on this map include a 250 kW battery at Butler Farms, and a 185 kW biogas generator owned by the farm, a 500 kW battery at Eagle Chase, and a propane generator owned by Wake EMC in partnership with the developer of a small subdivision. And then we see down south a 150 kW battery at Heron's Nest in Brunswick EMC, where a developer became interested in shared solar plus battery storage for a small subdivision. And then finally, we get to the two projects at Tideland EMC. Ocracoke Island's microgrid incorporates solar plus battery storage plus controllable thermostats and water heaters and a 3 megawatt diesel generator. Obviously, the goal there is resiliency out on the island given the interruption of storms. But most importantly, for the good egg, Mr. Matt Tangman, we have the Rose Acre Farms project, which is a planned 2 megawatt per hour solar facility charging a 2.5 megawatt per hour battery storage array, and this is all going to be owned by North Carolina's electric cooperatives. Phase 2 is 2.2 megawatts of diesel generation that actually would be added to the microgrid and is owned by the farm itself. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt now, who's going to use this next slide to quickly familiarize everybody with the Rose Acre Farm Corporation. And thank you, Matt, for being with us today.
Well, good morning, everyone. And yes, thank you for the opportunity to join this group as a novice, and I will try to uphold my end of this bargain. Rose Acres is the second largest egg producer in the United States, and we were looking to expand our market territory to the southeast, and Hyde County was, I guess, they were willing to accept one of our largest egg facilities, looking for the acreage to do that, and also then the electricity that Tideland offers us, and it allowed us the markets for some of our national retail customers, and with the facility in Hyde County, we have about 200 employees. So it was one of our two large facilities that has about the capacity of 3.4 million hens, and they pump out 195,000 dozen eggs a day. So it is a large facility for us, and has been running well, and when we started looking at sustainability as a corporation, North Carolina, I think, we were looking at states where it might work best, and North Carolina was one of those. And I can't say enough about the cooperation we've received from NC, EMC, and Tangman to make this I guess an ongoing project, and we believe it will be a successful project. With their input, we have been able to introduce solar to Rose Acres, and that led to yet another project out in Arizona where we have another facility. So I think without their input into this, that may not have happened. And they being Tangman and NCEMC, have worked with our farm managers, and they have made them feel comfortable with the microgrid aspect of it. When you're dealing with livestock, it's depending upon their feed, water, and air. The management gets a bit skittish about you're going to do what with our generators, but I think the ongoing conversation that has been provided to them are getting them comfortable with it. And I think COVID slowed down our progress of the project, but it is underway again now. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, sir. And we appreciate those kind words. I think this next slide will give the audience a perspective on an aerial. There we go. And you mentioned the partnership. We're very proud of it. So appreciative of the compliments you gave us. And the electric resiliency is important. An observer would say, well, look, if they've got all this diesel, then how are you really adding anything? And obviously what we're adding is a renewable resource, A, and then B, when they need to rely on their diesel entirely, we're minimizing fuel costs. Happy to answer questions later on as Mr. Starling poses them about this project. Again, very proud of it. And I want to say to the audience that in our prep for this, Mr. Starling had joked with Matt that the one thing that he wanted out of this experience was a dozen eggs. And I guess if they're producing 195,000 dozen a day, maybe that's not such a large ask.
That's right. Oh, my.
It's a lot of eggs. I think many of us don't realize just what a footprint Rose Acre has up in the northeast part of the state. And so, Matt, thanks for being with us. And this is interesting what you all are doing with regard to energy. Let me stay with you just a second, Matt, and we're going to get to some of these questions over in the chat box. If you have questions, how we're recruiting agriculture, ag food, ag processing businesses in particular, and how energy plays into that, I hope you'll pose those questions in the chat box and we'll give them over to our panel. But Matt, the first one's coming to you. I think folks would be surprised to learn when you are competing for contracts, just how tight the margins are in the food space. How does energy play into that? And do you think some of this is going to allow you to have a little better competitive advantage going forward? Some of this alternative work here.
It is interesting. Maybe a year ago, our CEO challenged us to seek out ways to save a penny a dozen. So a coworker and I, we are keeping track of the thousands of cents that we might be saving in our successes. And don't know that we've reached that yet, but we continue to try to keep a running total of it. And being a commodity business, the sale contracts, they are won or lost by just a half a cent per dozen. And our customers, like most of the industry, they're not going to pay us any more than what the lowest bid might be. And unfortunately, the consolidation in the retail grocery markets have eroded away customer loyalties. Service and quality are still expected, but the price wins the bid. So profitability within the industry is measured in pennies as well, with a historic earning average of approximately about 5 cents a dozen. And so effectively managing all of our costs is essential to remaining competitive and ultimately being successful.
Well, take that competitive piece, and Bill, I want you to jump in here because it's not just about in the food space. It's not just about cost or expense. My understanding is that in the consumer space, consumers are looking more and more at those sustainability questions and the environmental footprint, that kind of question. As you talk to food companies that are looking to cite themselves here, how do those sorts of questions relate to what we're talking about here with regard to energy?
Yeah, I think the food industry has evolved over the last decade, and maybe even as close in as the last 5-7 years, in being more conscientious about their energy usage and sustainability for the future. So they're beginning to look a little bit more at what renewable sources we can get to. We're having a lot more conversations about cogen on site so that we can do renewable natural gas from the biomass we're generating. Like I said, probably a decade ago or 5-7 years ago, when we go to monitor the electrical usage in our plants or our natural gas usage, of course, it was a matter of looking at our meters. We didn't have the sensors on every motor that we have today or on every burner. Those have evolved over the last decade for sure. Now that we have the capability to monitor and begin analyzing this data, then we can move towards controlling our energy usage again. And then, of course, the big thing then is sustaining that ongoing effort. It's not just a matter of reporting every year what your sustainability goals are and whether you've made them or not. It's a matter of how are you continually improving them. And as the technology keeps advancing, we keep grinding down further and further into our processes and our operations to understand, what time of day to be running something as opposed to another time. Maybe there's even a weekly cycle that makes more sense from an energy perspective. Of course, the people that are buying our products have been moving towards clean label, more sustainable energy usage. The list goes on. And the big push for buying locally, of course, is the fact that we utilize less fossil fuel to move those products to market. So it's nearly impossible for every food manufacturer, of course, to put a site in all 50 states, much less, in communities, multiple sites in a community. So.
Thanks, Bill. And Paul, I'm going to come back to you here on this one because, and really combining the two questions, right? So we've got the economics and then we've got what that consumer wants out there, that sustainability logo. And Bill talks about what the consumer is looking for next. But, I think a lot of people overlook the role that the co-ops and that our electric providers in the state really play in economic development. How did the dance between you guys and Rose Acre, how did it really start? How long did it take? What went well? What didn't go well? How do we infuse more of these kinds of conversations?
Oh, that's a good question. It was this was a long process with a good deal of dedication from Rose Acre itself. I don't want to speak for Matt, and maybe I'll bounce to him before I give it back to you, but I know that their motivation was very much in response to sustainability interests from consumers and from national retailers. And ultimately, I don't mind speaking about it. Matt's probably thinking whether or not I'll bring this up. Ultimately, Matt was asking hard questions about cost as well, from an electric point of view. Matt's chief operating officer for Rose Acre Farms as a corporation nationally, Tony, loves to remind me that we're not the cheapest. And so, any work that we could do, he reminds me of that quite often. Any work that we could do in combination with them to help them address sustainability objectives and help them minimize cost footprint of energy. That was their motivation. And the timeline began in late 2017. And ultimately, North Carolina's electric cooperatives approved the project in the fall of 2019. Breaking ground took place. We had our all hands on deck meeting about 18 days ago, and we're about to be underway with construction within the next 30 days. Hopefully, the microgrid will begin delivering energy sometime in the late fall. So that's where we are. It's been a very long project, but it's been rewarding for Tideland.
Matt, what would you add to that? Just looking at you, you look like a tough negotiator. So I kind of feel what Paul's talking about there. But what would you add to what he said about the timeline? If you can hear me. Matt may, look, he's out there. He may have gotten a blip in service for a moment, Matt. Paul, you want to repeat the question to Matt? He might be able to hear you better. I don't know.
Sure, Matt, you might have heard pieces of my answer regarding the timeline and the relationship between Rose Acre and Tideland, and he was just asking for your commentary on cost, renewable objectives, or any other item you wanted to speak about in that 3-year period.
It looks like we're getting a negative head shake there from Matt, which may be what he did for you, Paul, when you first started talking about the cost of this, and it got better and better over time.
Yeah,
And I'm
Matt.
going to pull Sean in here because Sean, again, you are providing service down in a part of the state that I call the food processing mecca, if you will. I mean, some of those companies you had on the screen, it is mind-boggling as it is as it is with Rose Acre, just the volume of protein that's being processed down that way. What do you hear those companies say most frequently when it comes to their energy needs and what they're worrying about for the future? I know a lot of times our best economic development is to dance with the one that brung us, to grow with the folks that are already here. How are you working to do that down in that part of the state, Sean?
Honestly, that you're absolutely right. One of the things that the existing companies here are constantly talking to us about is the change in the market, the change in the retail customers' wants and needs towards a cleaner, more sustainable, low carbon delivered product. So they're constantly talking to us about what it is we can do to help them along with that process. We've been really fortunate here in North Carolina, and particularly in our area. One of the things, almost the first question that I always that they meet me with is, when you look at our energy mix or our fuel mix, what we're delivering, well over 50% of the energy we're delivering to your facility in this area is coming from a nuclear source, no carbon, no NOx emissions. So let's build from that position there. And generally, when we start that discussion, they don't have a clue about that, but it always gets them interested in it. And truthfully, what I believe, particularly poultry, and that's really the heavy portion of our livestock production here is poultry. A good amount of swine, but poultry is probably the predominant animal protein we grow and process in this area. Honestly, from what I'm hearing from all these guys, it's going to continue to grow. Poultry is one of the fastest, one of the cheapest sources of animal protein that we can produce. But in talking with some of the executives at these companies, they're a little bit concerned that long term, the rise of these animal-free, plant-based protein sources is going to erode away some of their market. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to position themselves that their company is sustainable, that the growing process is sustainable, that even though it's animal protein, it's done in a clean, sustainable, and energy efficient manner. So we're doing whatever we can to help promote that along with their energy needs, because you're right, growing existing business is oftentimes a lot easier than going out and procuring these new companies that may or may not want to relocate a facility to your area.
Thanks, Sean. Let's stay on that alternative protein question and come to Bill. I know that's something Bill looks a lot at and is in fact, frankly, working with folks. I heard you, Bill, the other day. We can quiz the folks here. Why would Bill at the Food Innovation Lab, why would he be developing products with beet juice? Now think about that a minute. Why would Bill need to help with beet juice? And Bill, we'll let you explain the answer, but talk also more broadly about that alternative protein sector and whether there are opportunities for that here in a state that's already a leader in the actual protein sector.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. We've, I get this question asked a lot. Will we ever displace animal-based protein with plant-based? I think the simple answer to that is probably not. When we look at the growth of the population in the world over the next 20 years, we're going to go to 10 billion people. And quite frankly, we're going to need every protein source we can raise, whether that be plant-based or animal-based, and probably even fermentation-based, looking ahead. But certainly with North Carolina's capability, we've got 6 different climatic zones in this state, 100 different soil types. We can grow just about any crop outside of a tropical crop in the state. And so we should be able to produce the products or the grains and the plants that we need to be utilizing for extraction of plant-based protein. Now, can we do it energy efficiently? That's yet to be seen. I think that's one of the things that, I'll be honest, even in our industry right now, we've been a little bit reckless with some of the techniques we're utilizing, because it utilizes a lot of water, it utilizes a lot of electrical energy, utilizes natural gas, of course, to dry those products. But I think as the whole push forward for more efficient use of energy comes to a peak, we'll see people come back and say, okay, are we really saving that much money or that much energy by going to plant-based proteins? It's renewable, so we're not, it's not like we're raising animals, but certainly we still have that challenge. Looking ahead, plant-based proteins, I think, do have a good place in our future from a consumer's perspective, but will they totally displace the animals? I don't think so. I think we just need to keep working together to realize at what point do you have to have an animal-based protein in your diet versus a plant-based protein in your diet. They aren't digested the same. We haven't found a way yet to make plant-based proteins as nutritionally complete as animal-based. So even though I'm a plant-based focused facility, I think there's still a lot of room for animal agriculture in our future yet.
Yeah, it's interesting, Bill. I know in talking to farmers, particularly those involved in cattle, pork or poultry production, they kind of turn their nose up at this alternative protein stuff. And what I like to say to them is, it's not for you. There's a group of consumers out there that have different tastes and different goals with regard to their plates. And so you don't leave us hanging. Tell us about the beet juice.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the alternative meat industry is looking at all sorts of different sources of red products to make it look like blood in those products. If you remember back a few years ago, some of the first products that came out had a kind of a death gray color to them, as opposed to that nice bright color we see from hemoglobin in the animal tissue. So therefore, any place we can extract a red color, whether it be pomegranate, beets, or strawberries, we're going to be taking a peek at to see what we can do.
That's great. Let me stay with you, Bill, and I'm going to pose this question to you first, and then we'll go to Paul and get his take on it. And that is, there's a lot of conversation in this state about growing the food processing footprint. The legislature has bought in, even your facility there. You told me a few weeks ago you have more work than you can frankly get finished. You have more folks needing the help of the lab than you actually have capacity for. It seems like when you hear from folks like Sean and county leaders like Paul used to be, this is an industry folks would love to have in their backyard and want to add to their repertoire. How are we really doing? And really critically, what's missing? What else could we be doing to grow even faster? And then, like I said, Paul, coming to you with that perspective from way out east. But go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'd like to be able to say, North Carolina Chamber's been a leader in this. We, and probably some of the best conversations I've had the last year or so have been with North Carolina Chamber. But certainly, the opportunity for North Carolina, it was why I even titled my talk "The Nexus." The opportunity for North Carolina to become the food valley of the United States is great. I mean, we have a lot of food technology in the state. We have a lot of nutrition technology, even going back to the basic sciences, things we're doing in the Triangle, things we'll be doing in the plant science building, the new plant science building, all contribute to growth in this industry. What we're probably missing yet at this point, I think there's two things we're missing. One, we really haven't done a very good job of advertising to the rest of the country about North Carolina's strong agricultural being, and then our ability to process and make food. So I think a lot of people that are out there today probably don't recognize how powerful North Carolina could be. Now, if I narrow us in and even into the state, and I think there's some good conversations going on with our General Assembly right now. We've had some conversations with Chamber, with Golden Leaf Foundation and others. But what's missing right now is that our fellow colleagues, our fellow peers in the food industry and even in the ag industry haven't figured out a way yet to band together, strategically go after becoming the number one nexus for food manufacturing and for nutrition technology. If we look at a state like Ohio, which compared to us from an agriculture perspective isn't nearly as powerful, but probably about 7 years ago, they formed a coalition or an alliance with food manufacturers, energy providers, other food alliances together to start promoting the ability for Ohio State to position themselves as that state where biotechnology and food technology come together. We tend to, we tried having a talk right around Christmas with several of the major food manufacturers here in the state, and some of the smaller ones. And I think that being blunt about it, I think we have to check our own agendas at the door when we walk into a meeting like that and start figuring out what's good for the state. So I think those are some of the things that we need to address it. And we need to, if we're going to get to that point where we are recognized, certainly nationally, perhaps globally, for our ability for nutrition and food tech, that's what it's going to take.
Great comments. Paul, what would you add to Bill's comments?
Well, I'm going to get in trouble with my employers for answering the question this way, but Tideland's probably a little bit far flung from the transportation corridors that are necessary for delivering this in a successful way. Obviously, what's good for the state is good for the electric co-ops, and we're not territorial about how it gets done. But being partial to the east, I'll say that very partial to the I-95, 264, and 64 corridors. And we do have electric co-ops that are very active in the C&I site readiness space. I think Ryan, if he were interrupting me, would say having buildings that are ready is obviously even more important than site readiness. But the co-ops that have been active in that space that are maybe more closely located to infrastructure than Tideland is, Lumbee River is one of those, South River's one, coming north, Pitt Green, Edgecombe Martin, Roanoke, Halifax. Those are all on that I-95 corridor with some help from 264 and 64. We love the way that network of roads sets up. We think it helps folks in our rural communities. We've got to do a good job of not only developing site readiness, but marketing site readiness.
Yeah. Well, and then I think to part of your point, and Matt, I'm going to ask for your comment here. There are some parts of food production that it's probably better that they occur in lesser populated areas. I mean, without getting us in trouble, would you agree with that? I mean, there are certain parts of the production cycle that frankly are challenging in urban or suburban areas, right?
Yeah, that is correct. And that was one of the good parts of North Carolina, that we could get the acreage that isolates the farm from nearby neighbors. And so, yeah, that is true. There are factors that are not necessarily the greatest.
Yeah, well, and Sean, let me come to you now. There was a question posed, and really to anybody, but I'm trying to keep you all equally as labored by the questions here. But there was a question in the chat box, and we invite folks to add more. And I'm curious about this one: vertical agriculture or indoor agriculture. Are you hearing that anyone's interested in that, doing the inside greenhouse climate control type stuff down in your neck of the woods, or has that come across your screen at all?
Oddly enough, we actually just done a article 2 months ago in Carolina Country. We have a local greenhouse operator focusing primarily on microgreens right now. Extremely young entrepreneur in his early 20s, graduated, didn't exactly know how to get into conventional agriculture. Set up a couple greenhouses and has been really successful with that. In this area, we don't see a lot of it. It is one of those niche markets. But as land becomes more scarce because of development, I do think we will see proliferation of vertical agriculture take place. And how we as, typically those type of operations tend to be energy intensive more so than conventional row crop operations. So from an electric cooperative standpoint, we see those as great opportunities. But further down the road, at least in our areas, because rural co-ops tend to be rural, we're in areas that have land availability. So I would imagine we would see that take place in more urban areas before it eventually migrates out to these rural communities.
Yeah, great answer, and neat that you actually have somebody in your back door doing that. Paul, I want to come back to you because anytime we talk about electricity, anytime we talk about energy, resiliency comes up. You heard Nell mention it earlier. It just matters, and it matters particularly in the food processing context where you can really lose a big batch of something if you don't have reliable service. Talk about from your perspective, and really, Sean, you can jump in here as well. How does resiliency impact the conversation here, and how are we doing, particularly outside of our populated area?
Valid question, and Matt can likely weigh in as well. That subject is probably at the top of Rose Acre's mind right after they give me the devil on rates. They always give me the devil on outages, but they given the level of investment that they made, they prepared themselves with some massive privately owned diesel assets that would blow the audience's mind. I haven't gotten a green light to share the total of their diesel assets out there, so I won't do that just yet. But we built a substation dedicated for that purpose, an express circuit. When an investment like that comes along, you take resiliency very seriously. And at least from a C&I point of view, we understand, particularly in the summertime, how dangerous an outage can be for what Rose Acre is trying to deliver. So I'll let Matt comment on that if he feels free to.
But that is true with the generators, and we like the idea of the what I've heard of the microgrid is the second phase of our project. And I like to say the conversations with the farm managers, they're getting comfortable with it. But I like to think of it that at least one of our important accounts at the farm is going to have kind of like a battery backup. I mean, I think that's a pretty cool idea. And so looking forward to it.
Sean, comments on the resiliency piece, particularly with your protein folks down in the Southeast.
Yeah, pretty much every conversation they bring up resiliency. I mean, and resiliency for them is something beyond just getting power back on when there's a storm. Something as minor as a blink. This time of year particularly, animals start to come out of their dens. They start moving around. So squirrels, birds, snakes, and something as a minor blink. We've had some of our processors tell us, a 1 second or half a second blink can cost us tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in spoilage, lost productivity, because it's not a matter of just the lights are dim. Some of those lines have to be restarted. There's a process with that. And at least one has told us it can take a 1 second blink can take up to an hour to recover. So we make a lot of efforts. We make huge investments in any of the circuits we identify that we know are going to some of our large C&I customers that are that sensitive, making sure that they've got that extra protection, extra cover up on all of the lightning arresters, all of the interconnection devices, so that we can minimize those interruptions as much as possible, because ultimately that trickles down into how the level of service is for that customer and the satisfaction overall with the area. We've seen this with a couple of our other food processors, particularly Butterball. If they're satisfied with the service, maybe another area, particularly when you get into a competitive situation. And that's one of the things that makes the cooperatives unique, is because we can create these customized solutions because our management is here, our board of directors are our regulators. So when they're dissatisfied, and we have this situation going on with one of our C&I customers now, where the management of the company ultimately said it was a competitive situation, but they were dissatisfied with the service at the other provider. So they came to us because they said every time there's been an occurrence, an issue, you guys were quick to respond, you answered the phone. So that becomes a strong selling point for further recruitment and retention, because at the end of the day, it's about economic development. Our goal as rural cooperatives is to improve our rural communities. And the best way to do that is through job creation. And if we can do something that creates positive rapport with these companies, and they can bring additional jobs, that tends to be where we live and where we benefit most from.
John, I'm going to have to sign you up to come work at the chamber. Talking about creating that positive business environment, that's right down our alley here, and I know it is for the co-ops and the university system too. Bill, I never feel like, or every time we talk, I go away and I think later of other questions that I wish I had asked you. You mentioned in passing, probably you didn't think we'd come back to this, but you mentioned with regard to that alternative protein piece, you mentioned fermentation. And we are seeing more and more about, I think the industry may call it super brewed foods. It sounded like you had a little hesitation with regard to that. I'm curious about that piece, and frankly about energy use. I know that on the alternative protein side, with actually ramping up cells inside of stainless steel bins, that is an energy intensive process and something that has to be taken into account. But tell us a little bit more about this fermentation piece and what that may mean for the grid if that catches on.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair question. It's and you sensed my hesitancy accordingly. I think when you start talking about fermentation, we've got huge motors that have to turn agitators inside those fermenters. Most fermentations take an extended period of time. It's not something that happens very rapidly. We've got to heat those fermenters up, so that takes energy in itself. Then we have to cool them down when we're harvesting, and all the energy that goes there. The bigger challenge outside of the energy consumption that would be required for fermentation is the pure volumes that it would take to displace even animal agriculture. So, no, I'm not saying that it will never happen. I don't think it's going to happen quite as quickly as a lot of people. If you talk to the people that are involved in cellular meat, where they're actually doing tissue culture and raising pieces or growing pieces of meat, that's even further out than probably some of the proteins that we're able to get by fermentation. We do think that there will be some opportunities where protein's recovered as almost as a co-product from the manufacturing. You look at the yeast industry, you look at, there's a little company up in Durham, North Carolina called Arbium, where they're actually fermenting cellulose waste, wood waste, and they're manufacturing a protein product out of that. Right now, that protein is going to the animal feeding industry, but certainly they will be able to bring that to the human food industry very shortly. And that's when it makes a little bit more sense, maybe, that we're using byproducts from the industry and recovering that protein. So we've already, yeast manufacturers that are doing baker's yeast, brewer's yeast, that sort of thing. We've already used that substrate once for something. In the case of beer, we've made a beer, or we've made a vodka or something of that nature. And then we take those spent grains and come back and pull the protein out of them, and we create another new product line to just kind of complete the cycle and the supply chain.
I know there's some neat stories up in the western part of the state about the symmetry and the dependency between the brewer's grain coming out of those new breweries up there, and then the dairy industry putting it to work up there in the western part of the state. Great answer, Bill, as always. Sean, it looks like you responded to a question there in the chat box, and it sounds like more of a regulatory question and a cost recovery question. I don't know if you and Paul want to say anything else about it, but when you have to improve a part of the grid because of one of these industrial customers or commercial customers, if you will, where do you allocate that cost? I think that's a fair question. We'd just love to hear your simple response on that.
So with us, it's been kind of a mixed bag of how we do it. It really depends on the priorities associated with what's being asked for and what our ultimate goal is. For example, we have one of our largest C&I customers that came to us a little over 18 months ago and said, we are looking at expanding our facility and here's what we need. When we weighed out the value of the additional job creation associated with that, what we ultimately wound up doing is saying, listen, we can make customized solutions for you, because unlike the IOUs, we're self-regulated. Our directors set our rates. So this customer was large enough, and the project was unique enough that we created a special class of rate to recover that initial investment, because money was a big issue with them. So we know it's a long-term investment. We know they're going to be here, but the net impact, the net economic impact of the jobs created from this far exceeds the cost to that. So as a cooperative, everybody kind of contributes equally, and we see that as their contribution to the community. So it's advantageous to us to make that investment long term.
I'm gonna jump in, Sean.
We've had projects that have kind of went south that we should have recovered everything up front, but it becomes a judgment call, really.
Sure. Well, if you can learn to pick those versus the others, then that's pretty impressive. So we know there's some trial and error involved. Paul, unless you've got something burning to add on that, I'm going to jump back to Bill for a last question or two. We're going to run out of time. Feel free to put questions in the chat box, and if we don't get to them here, we will certainly get you a response. But Bill, one of the questions that we got is, do you have a list of contract manufacturers? I know a lot of what you're doing out in Kannapolis is concept design and deciding, is this product going to work? How do we do it? Then that product generally has to go somewhere else. Tell us about that industry and what that footprint looks like.
Yeah, there are a fair number of co-manufacturers, co-packers in the country. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot here in North Carolina, and we're trying to generate a list of some of those now ourselves. 5-6 years ago, when they started looking at the concept of the Food Innovation Lab, they had put together a list of all the food manufacturing companies here in the state. What the database is missing, of course, is if they are open to co-manufacturing or co-packing, and if they are, what kind of capability they have. And that seems to be one of the best guarded secrets in the state of North Carolina. People don't want to talk about what they have or don't have. We've reached out to other co-manufacturers co-packers throughout the country for some of our customers. And frankly, right now, almost all of them are very full. So there is a great need for some more co-packing, co-manufacturing throughout the entire country, almost as much as we need cold room storage. Cold storage is also at a premium. To that end, some people know that we've built a relationship with Big Idea Ventures out of New York. Big Idea is actually looking at potentially building a co-manufacturing facility here in North Carolina that would serve multiple food categories. And and I think they recognize that there's a real opportunity to having a facility like that here in North Carolina.
That's great, Bill. And David, Doctor, I think all of this conversation sort of leads us to a place where we conclude, just like every undergraduate who writes a report concludes it needs further research. That way they can do the master's. And then when they finish the master's, that needs further research. So they do the PhD. This conversation needs to continue. We appreciate this forum as a place where these folks who are doing stuff out in the field, Matt and Bill, I think about you, and then our energy providers like our co-ops, like Duke, like others in the state, coming together and having these conversations. I think it's important, and we appreciate this opportunity to have been with you today.